So this is, if you listen to the songs on the radio right now, this is the most wonderful time of the year, right? This is the most wonderful time of the year. And over again, what you hear in America is that Christmas is all about joy. So my question as we start the service today is, do you feel joyful? Do you feel joyful? Some of you would say, yeah, I am so happy about what's happening in my life and what's happening in this time of year. This is, for some of you, the most wonderful time of the year. But for some of you, the image that best captures how you feel right now is this. And you feel like the boy in the orange shirt, right? To me, like, yeah, that's me. I am holding on. You know, the reality is for many people, this time of the year, this is the most stressful time of the year for them. Because financially it overloads them and they're already taxed. It overloads our schedules when we're all so busy anyway, right? How many just have all this extra time to do all this extra stuff and you got to go shopping and oh my goodness, who has the time? And for many people, it's going to put you in the homes in the near future of people that are complicated, and you're going to have to be around them and spend time with people that don't always get along so well, and that's going to be complicated. And then if you throw in things that happen in life at this time of the year, I mean, for people, there are people who've suffered a terrible loss recently, and the holidays will never be the same for them. And so they're grieving in a time when everyone's talking about joy, joy, joy. I mean, this is tough, right? The reality is some of you feel a lot of joy today, some of you don't. But there's no doubt about it that Christmas and the Christmas message that was announced 2,000 years ago on the night of Jesus' birth was a message of joy. The angels appeared to the shepherds and said, "Behold, I bring you good news of great joy that will be for all the people." Now you're part of all the people. And so the message from God to you is, I want you to have joy. And the birth of my son into this world is intended to bring joy to you. Now, I've taught on joy many times. I can sincerely tell you, I learned more prepping this message about joy than I have ever learned on the subject. So much exciting stuff to talk to you about today. One of the things I learned is that I used to think that there's a difference between joy and happiness. And I've actually taught this before. I've said happiness is based on what's happening to you. And so that's why it's temporary. You go out and buy a new TV and you're happy for a little while and then it fades away. And then I said, but joy is something deeper. But as I was prepping for this message, I read some things that really challenged me on that subject. Did you know that 3 times in the Bible, joy and happiness are used in the same verse? Interchangeably. There doesn't appear to be in the Bible any difference between joy and happiness. That was a new thought to me. It's like, I'd never thought about that before. And many people would be surprised to know that the Bible actually talks about you being happy. Some of you are like, really? That's in there? Yeah, it is. It's actually in there. God wants you to be happy. God wants you to be joyful. You can use the words interchangeably. And one Christian pointed out this. He said, so here's the message that the world gets from Christians all the time. Don't seek happiness. That's the message, right? That's going to make you happy. Don't do that. He said, we need to send the right message. The right message is this. You will find in Jesus the happiness and joy you've always longed for. That's the message. You want to be happy, you want to be joyful, it's going to be found in Jesus, unlike anything you can ever have in this world. Now, some of you are very skeptical about that because you have known too many Christians. And you're like, I'm not sure I've ever seen that. I get that. We'll address that in this message today, but this is the true message of Christianity. It's the message of Christmas. Jesus came so that we could have joy. Now, one thing I have always known about joy is that you can have joy no matter what's going on in your life today. So some of you, again, your circumstances aren't very joyful today. Some of you, again, those things I listed earlier, financial problems, family problems, these things are happening right now, and joy isn't natural. You're not looking at your circumstances going, look at my circumstances, I'm so happy. So how can you have joy in the middle of circumstances that aren't going the way, it doesn't seem like those two things line up at all, but that's something I know. You can have joy no matter what your circumstances are. And I know this because of what it says in the Bible about this subject. If you read your Bible, there are 2 parts to it. The first part's called the Old Testament. The second part's called the New Testament. There are 26 books in the New Testament. Half of them were written by a man named Paul. Paul traveled all around the Mediterranean Sea, telling everybody he could about Jesus and starting churches in town after town after town. And this was very unpopular. 2,000 years ago when he was doing this, he was constantly being arrested and thrown into prison. Matter of fact, historians estimate he spent about 25% of his time as a Christian in prison. So here you go, come follow me. Jesus says to Paul, come follow me, I'm going to put you in prison. Now we hear prison and we think prison, right? You know, it's pretty sterile, steel bars, 3 meals a day, heat, air conditioning. You get out in the yard every day to play some basketball, maybe lift some weights, right? Paul was in prison. Yeah, we have the wrong image of prison. This is an actual prison cell from the time of the Romans when Paul was constantly being put in prison. And here is what one historian wrote about what Roman imprisonment was like. He said, Roman imprisonment was preceded by being stripped naked and then flogged. You were whipped. Then, your wounds, of course, were not treated. You were thrown either into leg chains or wrist chains and chained to the wall. Your clothing was never replaced. Never. Most cells were completely dark, especially the inner cells. Now, this one has a little tiny window you can see in the back, but all the inner cells had no light at all except from the torches that hung in the hallway. That's it. It was unbearably cold, little water, cramped quarters, obviously few toilets. And here's Paul spending, 1/4 of his time as a follower of Jesus in these conditions. Now, if that was you, Jesus said, hey, come follow me. I'm going to make your life so great, you're going to spend pretty much the rest of your life in a prison cell just because you want to tell people about me. How many of you are like, yeah, sign me up, that sounds awesome, right? And this is what he did. But the amazing part isn't that, he followed Jesus this way. The amazing part is what he was experiencing when he was in these prison cells. If you read the book of Philippians, it is a book 4 chapters long. Paul was in a jail cell, in a prison cell, and he wrote a book about joy. How much joy he had. Matter of fact, one time he wrote these words. Look at this. Our hearts ache, but we always have joy. Now, do you always have joy? Does it even seem real? I mean, doesn't it seem like, come on, pie in the sky Christianity here, right? You can always have joy. Come on, that doesn't seem true at all. But Paul knew what he was talking about. He knew how to have joy no matter what his circumstances were. He knew how to be happy even in a prison cell. Would you like to know that? Would you like to know how, even when your heart is aching, still to have joy? That's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about how to always have joy. Would you please open up your program? Inside are your notes. Please grab your notes. Grab a pen. There'll be some things you're going to want to write down today. Welcome to those who are watching on YouTube. So glad you've tuned in. In the comment section below are the notes. You can open this up and follow along. This is going to be, I'm so excited to talk about this today. Let's just get started. By the way, 4-point message, never going to get through all 4 of them. So scribble out number 3 for those of you who just love when I skip things. Sorry. Not very joyful. All right, number 1. First thing is you have to learn how to serve with the right message in mind. You have to learn how to serve with the right message in mind. So you're like, wait a second, I thought we were talking about joy and now you're talking about serving? Yes, hold that thought for a second. Let me ask you this. Do you know any self-centered people in your life? Yeah, smiles all over. Right, people that it is always about them all the time. It's about what they want all the time, and your opinion doesn't really matter. Matter of fact, they often treat you like you're stupid for having an opinion other than their opinion. Do you know people like this? A little bit controlling. It's all about them. It's all about what they want. Okay, so all of us do. All of us know selfish people like that in our lives. All of us know people that it is all about them all the time. Here's my next question. How many of those people are truly joyful? Have you ever met a selfish, joyful person? I have never. I've met plenty of self-centered, egotistical people. I've never met one that was joyful. And the reason is you cannot be joyful and selfish. You cannot. God didn't wire it to work that way. That'd be great, right? I mean, if all of a sudden it was just all about me all the time, and all of a sudden I felt joy from that, it's like, no, you don't get joy from that. Selfishness is destructive to joy. It's the opposite of joy. But in serving, you have the possibility of experiencing joy. Now, I'm saying that very carefully because some of you have had serving experiences where, honestly, it wasn't all that joyful. where you served someone and you weren't feeling joy? It's like, hey, Brian talks about this joy and serving stuff. That doesn't seem to fit. I've talked about this passionately for a long, long time now. We are servants. Jesus served. We're here to serve. We need to serve. We need to become servants. And I talk about this joy thing, and sometimes I forget to tell you that there's really a price to serving. And because I don't always talk about that, sometimes people really get hurt. One time, years and years ago, I was talking about how important it is to serve, and this woman who was attending the church that I was a pastor at the time took it very seriously. She's like, I'm going to help. And there was this woman that she knew, this young 20-something-year-old woman whose life was a mess. She'd struggled with addictions. She was barely surviving financially. Her life was just going all kinds of wrong. And so my friend said, I'm going to serve this woman. So she started meeting with her every week for coffee. She started buying her groceries, helping her get on a budget, helping her do this. But the problem was she cared more about turning this girl's life around than the girl cared about turning her life around. Do you know what happens, by the way, when you care more? Right? It's bad. My friend's heart was totally in the right place, right? She just wanted to serve. She just really wanted to help. But when that happens and there isn't that equality, then all of a sudden the girl started really taking my friend for granted, and then all of a sudden she started getting mad at my friend, and then all of a sudden she started spreading lies about my friend. So my friend came to see me in the office one day, and she was just devastated. She's like, wait a second, I'm doing what Jesus wants. I'm now serving, and I'm serving in a really tough spot, and I'm not experiencing joy. I'm getting hurt. And my friend was so disillusioned that she stopped helping that young girl, which I wasn't surprised by. But then she stopped serving at all in the church, and a short time later, she stopped attending church. And if she were to hear this first point, hey, doing a message about joy, and if you want to know joy, you got to serve. Oh my God, she would be like, that's not true. Because I served, and I didn't feel joy. I got really hurt. Some of you know that experience. You've tried to help someone, you've tried to serve in different times, and joy wasn't what you felt. So what's going on? Well, serving doesn't automatically lead to joy. Serving leads to joy when you keep the right messages in your mind about why you're serving. Jesus modeled this. One of the most amazing verses in the Bible. Hebrews 12:2, it says, fixing our eyes on Jesus, that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to think about him. Fix our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. And it says, for the joy set before him, look what he did. He endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Now, do not misread that verse. It does not say that the joy was the cross, right? It doesn't say Jesus came when he was born into this world 2,000 years ago. He knew that Bethlehem would lead to his execution. He knew what he was coming to do. God, the Son, left his home in heaven to be born into that manger 2,000 years ago, to become one of his own creations. God became a human so that he could eventually lay down his life on that cross. And it says he did all of this for the joy set before him. The joy wasn't the cross. If you know what happened the night before he was betrayed, he begged God in prayer, please, Father, if it's possible, let this cup pass from me. I don't want to do this. But your will be done, not mine. The joy wasn't the cross. So that amazing act of service happened because he kept the joyful thought in his mind about what was going to be on the other side of serving. The other side of serving was that, as it said, when it was done and he rose from the dead, he sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. That wasn't the joyful part. Back in heaven next to his Father. Nope, the joyful part was now every single person on earth. Now, all equally, every single one of us has opportunity to turn to God through his Son Jesus and have complete access to the only real God in the universe. And we can be forgiven and made right and put in his family. And for the joy set before him, he served us. The joy wasn't the service. The joy came from thinking about what the outcome of the service would be. That's what you need to know about serving. The act of service sometimes is painful or disgusting. And sometimes you're treated like a servant and it doesn't feel very good. It's not the service itself that leads to the joy. It's keeping in mind why you're serving. So recently, as a church, we went and helped out at Feeding Friends. So we had so many volunteers, we just had to make up stuff for people to do. So way to go, church. We had so many people there, and we served 128 people food that night. And the act of service may not have been all that joyful for some of you. But it's not the serving itself. It's keeping in mind why you were serving. So that when you were serving any of these people, you were serving Jesus. So you thought you were just scooping up some mashed potatoes, putting them on a plate. No, you weren't. Jesus makes it very clear that in eternity, when you stand in front of him, he'll go, oh my goodness, I was so hungry that night and you fed me, thank you. And you'll say, when did I do this for you? He said, what you did for any person on earth, you did for me. That's where the joy is. It's in remembering the truth behind the act of service. It's in remembering that God will reward this serving someday. It will count for all eternity. So do you keep the right mindset when you're serving? Because if you keep those things in your mind, you will have joy when you're serving. If you're serving and it's not very joyful, then you got to think about what's the message in your mind that's nullifying the joy. Serving itself doesn't create joy. It's serving with the mindset that Jesus had. Okay, so that's a tremendous possibility or opportunity for joy in this world. The second thing that we want to talk about when it comes to joy is you got to spend time with the right people. You got to spend time with the right people. Not everyone in the world is the right people, right? We all know that. Some of you are around people that are not the right people. This guy probably isn't the right people. You know, the person who invented this ornament for your tree, probably not the right people. Not hanging that on my tree. How about the teacher at the elementary school who wants to invite you all to have breakfast with Satan? Okay. Breakfast with Satan, it'd be warm. How about the person that threw this, all right? Probably not the right people. There are a lot of wrong people in the world, but there was a study that was done recently that will not surprise any of you to know that what they discovered is being with happy people makes you happier. Wow, profound. Thank you, let's all go home, right? You know this. You know this. It's not a matter of not knowing, it's a matter of understanding deeply what this actually means. It's not just being around them, because you can be around a happy person and still be sad, right? You can be around happy people and still be lonely. It's not just being with them, there's more to it than just that. So let's talk about what it means. Three things. First, it means you have to understand that people are a source of joy. They're a key to your joy in your future. If you want a more joyful life, then you're going to have to understand that you're going to have to get around these people, the right kind of people. Do you understand that? If you're going to pursue joy without people, that's not going to work. If you're going to pursue joy, you have to have the right people in your life. So that's the first thing. In the New Testament, again, Paul wrote about this repeatedly. He said, this person who came to visit him, his presence was a joy. Do you understand that? People can bring joy into your life. People can bring joy to your life. So I want you to know that if you want more joy in the next year, you're going to have to spend more time around the right people. But then it's more than that. You also need to learn how to connect with those people. What I'm saying is so true. It's not just being in the room with somebody that gives you joy. It's learning how to connect with those people. People are a source of joy, and learning how to connect with them is what will bring you tremendous joy. If you build these deep, intimate, close relationships with people, connections, then you have the opportunity for joy. So Paul, that writer of the New Testament, the guy in prison, had a friend. And he wrote about him. He wrote 2 letters in the Bible to him. His name was Timothy. He was a young pastor. Look at the connection they had. I long to see you again. I remember your tears as we parted, and I will be filled with joy when we are together again. So what does connection really mean? Because it's not just about being around people. You can go and be in all kinds of parties this next couple of weeks and not feel any joy. Connection with people means this, and this is from one of my favorite authors, Dr. Henry Cloud. He said, we were created for intimacy, to connect with someone with heart, soul, and mind. Now, intimacy occurs when we are open, vulnerable, and honest. We know each other at deep levels when we share our feelings and our fears and our failures and our hurts. This kind of sharing helps us to feel we are not alone in the world. We are meant to have intimacy with others. If we do not, we experience isolation. That's what some of you feel. You feel so lonely. You can be married and lonely. You can be in a big family and be lonely because you don't have connection. Now, like it says, even if we're in some kind of relationship, time with someone does not make a connection. Only true sharing and intimacy create connection. So joy comes from people, but it's not just about being in a room with happy people. It's about learning how to connect. Now, this isn't a message on that. We're going to do a message on that, probably a whole series on that in the next year on how to actually genuinely connect with people, because it's a lost skill in our society. But that's what we need to learn how to do. People create joy. Connecting with these people really is the way that we experience that joy. And then, obviously, like I've already said in the title, it requires the right people. So you need to learn how to build friendships and relationships with the right people, because this is what I really want you to know, okay? What I really want you to know is this. If you get the right people in your life, you learn how to connect with them, they can share their joy and happiness with you. One of my favorite verses about this. Yes, you should rejoice, and I will underline those last three words. Share your joy. I will share it. Joy can be shared. Do you know that? A couple of years ago, when so many things went wrong in my life, I felt a level of despair and hopelessness that I've never known. And one day, I was alone in my house. Actually, I think one of my daughters was home. And I just felt, you ever been so depressed that it feels like the world is on a dimmer switch and like everything's just a little darker? Ever felt so much despair that it feels like there's just this pressure pushing down on you? Like everything's just harder than it's normally harder. That's what I was feeling that day, and I didn't know what to do. So I called a couple of friends of mine. They were tired, and I was hoping they were home, and they said, well, come on over. And so these are good friends. Good friends. So I went to their house, and I sat, and again, they didn't open their Bible. They didn't preach at me. There was none of that. We just sat in their living room, and we talked for hours. And the incredible thing was, it's the first time I can dramatically remember sharing the joy of another human being. I had no joy to bring. But their joy was shared with me that day. I felt so different when I went home. The world seemed normal again. That pressure on me was gone. And I felt happy. Do you know that by experience? Do you know what it means to be in the presence of people who share their joy with you? This is an amazing thing that God has wired inside of us. People are going to be a source of your joy in the future. If you don't have joy and you want joy, it's going to be about connecting with the right people. Do you understand that? So if you don't have this, and some of you do, some of you have a tremendous connection with your spouse. You're so deeply connected to your spouse that you just feel this from them constantly. Some of you, it's from another family member. Some of you, you have close friends or coworkers that you just love and you feel so deeply connected to, and so you get this all the time. But some of you are sitting here going, yeah, I don't have enough of this. Then what I'm going to tell you is you got to take a risk. Next year, when we launch life groups, that's the first thing I'd tell you to sign up for. You see all these life groups starting. I encourage you to sign up for one, because in that, it will not happen instantly. By the way, if somebody tries to make it happen instantly, they're the wrong person. They come right up to you, hi, my name is Brian, and I was this as a kid, and this happened to me as a child, and it's like, whoa, hey, too soon, too quick, slow down. There are people like that. It's like, wrong person. You need to go talk to a counselor. So you let that relationship grow. What are you doing to build them? There are some of you, you're sitting nearby somebody who's going to be your best friend, somebody who's going to be that connection for you. You just have to take the risk to be with them. Okay? That's where joy comes from. Joy comes from people. It comes from serving with the right idea in mind. And now, the most important thing I'm going to tell you, and I've saved it for last because it is just the deal right here. If you do nothing else, do this one. in the scribble, I know I put God, I had a different thing written there. Just write this in the blank, cry out to God. This is what I really want you to know. You don't wonder where joy is going to come from. Joy comes from him. And this point is really for all of you who are having a blue Christmas. Hey, for those of you doing good, I don't need to tell you a lot about joy because you already feel joyful and you feel happy. But this is for those of you having a blue Christmas. It's not going the way you want it to go. In 2018, some of you ever have those years where you're like, I can't wait for the calendar to start over. I can't wait for January 1st because I want to bury the last year. Some of you, this is where you're at today. You can't wait for a new year. So here's what I want you to know. And when I was reading, I read this quote. I thought this was so interesting. I wanted to share it with you. Joy is a barometer of your spiritual life. And what they're saying is, if you want to know how you're doing spiritually, one of the legitimate questions to ask yourself is, well, how much joy do I feel right now? If you're ranking your joy, I know that's purely subjective, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being, oh my goodness, I'm about to explode in song. And 1 being like, yeah, despair, hopelessness. Where are you on the joy scale? So he's saying if it's not 7, 8, 9, 10, the author of this is saying, then something's wrong spiritually. Because our God is a God of joy. Do you know in the Bible it says, in his presence is fullness of joy. Jesus said he came so that we could have joy and life and have it to its fullest. Matter of fact, he says in the New Testament that one of the reasons he put the Holy Spirit inside of us at the moment we believe is so that he could produce the quality of joy in us. In Galatians 5, it lists 9 qualities God wants to give you, and joy is one of them. Joy, 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 joy. Now, is that the experience of the average follower of Jesus? I'm like, have you been to church? Have you ever been to church? One of the worst experiences of my life came in a church a couple of years ago, Christmas Eve, and I brought my 2 daughters to this Christmas Eve service in an area church, not going to mention the name. I walked in, and it was one of those years, it's like, I want this year to end. But I really want to have a Christmas experience with God on Christmas Eve. And so we walked in, nobody said hi to us. It was a big building, probably seated, easily could hold 250 people. Maybe there were 70 people in there. We sat in the back, and people turned around and looked at us and then turned back. Nobody was smiling. It's Christmas Eve. Nobody was smiling. And once the guy started talking, then I knew why they weren't smiling. So it's like, and it was, the whole thing was depressing. Matter of fact, we only made it about halfway through the service, and I finally just tapped my daughters because I couldn't take it anymore. I said, let's go. We stood up and walked out. We drove home, and I just wept on the way home. I'm like, that's it? That's Christianity. I mean, there are no people I know of who are like, I really want to explore Christianity because those Christians are so full of joy. Oh, they tell us that we're full of something. It's not joy, right? Where's the disconnect? What's going on? In his presence is fullness of joy. He gave us his Spirit so we could experience joy. We're not very joyful. We sure wouldn't say what Paul said at that opening verse, right? I'm always full of joy. Even when my heart is aching, I still know joy. Why? Why? It's because we struggle so much to do what God says is the source of joy in those moments of brokenness. We struggle so much with this. So let me tell you what I've experienced, because I know what it's like to be joyful, even when your heart is breaking. So this I know. Not that long ago, I had an experience that really hurt me deeply, and I was telling myself the wrong story about my life, and the result of that was tremendous pain. I was in so much pain. All I could do is I was alone, and I sat alone. I had some worship music on. And at the end of the worship song, the song leader just started saying the name Jesus over and over again. And as I heard him saying this, all of a sudden I just felt prompted just to cry out to Jesus. So alone, sitting there with this worship in so much pain, I haven't felt that much pain in a long time. I just cried out and I said, I need your help. And I didn't say it like that. It was like, help. It's like, help. I can't do this. I'm in so much pain, I can't go on. And then I just burst into tears, started crying. I had my Bible right next to me. And so I flipped open my Bible. And if you've heard me teach before on this, I always say there's one book of the Bible you need to go to when you're in pain. Does everyone know what this is? The book of the Bible you go to when you're hurting and your heart is breaking and you feel no hope is the book of Psalms. The biggest book right in the middle. And you let God say something to you through that book. So I flipped open right there, and this is what God is like. There's like 130 Psalms in there. I flip right to these verses. I waited patiently for the Lord to help me. And he turned to me and heard my cry. He lifted me out of the pit of despair, out of the mud and the mire. He set my feet on solid ground and steadied me as I walked along. He has given me a new song to sing, a hymn of praise to our God. Many will see what he has done and be amazed. They will put their trust in the Lord. Oh, and this is why I'm teaching on this today, the joys of those who trust in the Lord. You want to know joy, especially in those times of despair and heartbreak, it's because you follow what he tells you to do in these verses. So the very first thing, and it was so clear to me, is you cry out to God. It's the first thing. So this really just means sometimes help. And that's all you can say, help. You turn to God, and maybe that's the only prayer, one word prayer. That's all it takes. Now, the amazing thing about this is we don't do it. We don't do it. Some of you are in the middle of things that are so painful, and you haven't said, God help me, one time to him. Not once. You're struggling with stuff that nobody knows about, and you're not saying, help me. You're facing a need that is overwhelming to you, or some pain that is overwhelming to you. You feel no joy right now, and you're not even saying, help me. Now, interestingly, one of the major reasons why we don't turn to God, we don't cry out to him, is because we feel like, what's he going to do? Or we feel like he doesn't really want to hear from me because I've blown it. Interesting, you go on and read in the rest of Psalm 40. He was in this trouble and in all this pain and despair because he had blown it. He had sinned. And some of you, that's how you feel. It's like, I've messed up. My pain is my fault. I deserve this pain. So I'm not going to ask for God. I'm just going to try and figure it out myself. I'm going to try and get through it myself. And the whole time he's saying, would you just cry out to me? Because here's what you need to know about God. Okay, ready? God is not just a loving God. He is a God of love. This is his character all the way through. Do you know what happens when you cry out to a God of love? He always does this. He turns toward you. This is such a significant phrase. Do you understand how important that is? The psalmist had blown it. He deserved to be in that pit. The consequences were his own consequences for what he chose to do. And he cried out to God in that pit, and God turned toward him. How significant this is. If you read anything about marriage, two of the best, most respected marriage experts in our society today, in our world today, are Dr. John Gottman and his wife. They do in-depth research on what makes great marriages. The stuff online is fascinating about them. What I learned as I've been reading about this and watching some of their videos is just incredible. What they tell you is if you want to know, they can predict with 90% accuracy, documented, 90% accuracy if your marriage is going to make it. 90%. That's pretty statistically significant. And their results are reproducible by other people who are doing this. One of the first things they watch is they've got you hooked up to all these machines and watching everything about you and putting you in a room and having you talk to your spouse. One of the first things they watch is what happens when your spouse tries to bring up something painful or difficult. Which way do you turn? They say it's one of the deciding factors whether your marriage is going to make it. If they bring something up and you turn away, or you only partially turn toward them, and it's not just body language, it's actual, I'm listening to you. What you're saying to me right now really matters to me. If they turn toward you when you're in pain, you're going to make it. Almost always. If they are indifferent toward your pain or they turn away from your pain, then you're in that 90% that's probably not going to make it. That's how significant turning toward you really is. Which way do they turn? You know which way God turns when you cry out to him? He turned toward me. He turns toward you every time. It doesn't matter if you created the problem. It doesn't matter if you created the pain. It doesn't matter what the consequences are for what you've chosen to do. And then the psalm just blows up with the activity of God. He's like, you turn toward me, here's what you get. And then he goes on to say, he turned toward me, heard my cry. He lifted me because I was in a pit of despair. He set my feet on solid ground. And then he steadied me as I walked along. And then, incredibly, transforms my heart. So the old song of pain and despair and hopelessness I was singing, he takes that one out and he puts a new song in, and now you sing a new song of joy. And all of this is the activity of God. It all begins when you turn to this God of love. He transforms your old song to a song of joy. And then he sums it up and says, oh, the joys of those who trust the Lord. So the question, of course, is, what are you doing with the pain in your life? What are you doing with the fears and worries and things you're scared about in your life? Are you just trying to figure them all out yourself? Are you avoiding the God of love? Which way are you going with it? The number one thing that people talk to me about, the people who know me best, the number one thing that people say to me repeatedly is how happy I am. How much they can see how happy I am. It has nothing to do with my circumstances. The happiness and joy that I feel, I know what it's like to be so full of joy that I just have to stop what I'm doing just to say thank you to God. I just have to stop and say, I just want to say thank you and to express your love for him. I know what it's like to be so full of joy, even when circumstances are this. I know what it's like to have my heart ache and have joy. You can have both. Because God, a God of joy, wants to put his joy in your heart and give you a new song to sing if you will turn to him. So what is it you're holding back from God? What area of your life do you need to bring to him and say, here, I need help. This is beyond me. This is scary to me. This is overwhelming to me. I need your help. Then watch what he does as he begins to lift you and steady you and change the song in your heart. For those of you who say you follow Jesus, that question is really important. You've got to wrestle with, if joy is really a spiritual test, how much joy do you live with? How much joy do you live with? As if your life isn't an experience of joy, if you can't say what Paul said here in this verse, then why not? One of two things is wrong. God's a liar, or something you're doing in your relationship with God isn't working. Something's missing. I'm pretty sure it's not the liar piece. So something's broken in your connection with God that you need to think about that. Because that's how you can live. That's what I get to experience. Anybody can have it. So maybe, again, one of these pieces is missing. Maybe you're not serving with the right mindset. Maybe you don't serve at all. Maybe you don't have the right people in your life. Or the last one is really most likely you're not crying out to God about the things in your life that are overwhelming you. You're just trying to figure it all out yourself or fix it all yourself, or you're avoiding God, the God of love and joy. Let me have you all bow your heads as we finish today. Some of you came here today or you're watching online and you're just exploring your faith here with us. This is so significant. You need to know exactly what he is inviting you to. He is not saying it's going to be pain-free. He's saying that he will be there with you in the pain to lift you up and steady you and give you a new song to sing. Paul followed Jesus and went to prison. I have no idea what he's going to ask you to do or where he's going to direct you. I can only say it will be absolutely worth it to live with joy in this world. And this isn't pie-in-the-sky Christianity. This is actual Christianity. You can have this. You can live with joy. You can be joyful despite circumstances. You can know joy and heartache at the same time. And for those of you who don't know him, I mean, this is not about a church service. It's not about some religious thing you got to do for him. It is entirely about getting to know God in a relationship through his son Jesus, who for the joy set before him endured the cross. Jesus came into this world 2,000 years ago at Christmas time, when we celebrate Christmas time, knowing that the end of his time on earth would be he would lay down his life for all of us. Our Father in heaven is pure and perfect and beautiful and loving, and we are not. We are flawed, and we have chosen over and over again to do unloving things. We have brought unloving things into this world. We're not perfect, and he is. So what we've done that's wrong has to be paid for. It's why Jesus came. The full punishment was paid by Jesus on the cross that day. And then he rose again and offers everyone the same thing. And if you want what he offers you with your head bowed and your eyes closed, you can say something like this to him. Say, Jesus, I turn to you today. I need you. Spent so much of my life knowing about you. I want to know you. Please, forgive me. Come make your home inside of me and bring joy. In Jesus' name, amen. Now, as we finish up today, can I ask you all to grab your connection card? Would you please take a moment and fill this out, even if you're a regular attender? If you're a regular attender, just put your name down. But maybe you want us to pray about something. There's a place where you can write your prayer requests. If you want to sign up to get more information about hosting a life group for us, just let us know. Maybe you just prayed and asked Jesus to forgive you. Just check the box. Let us know what you've done. Then drop this in one of the 2 offering boxes back on the back wall where you came in. Thanks for coming. I hope you experience joy this week.